Welcome back to ADHD Realities. I'm your host, Leanne Borneman, sexologist, certified sex therapist, and ADHD expert, and this is the podcast we talk all things ADHD sexuality in a way that the research still isn't poo-poo bagoo. And in today's short 15-minute episode, I am talking about something very important in honor of National Masturbation Month. And for some people, that might sound like a cheeky marketing gimmick, but I'm here to tell you, yeah, there's actually a National Masturbation Month, and it's actually a huge opportunity for reflection, for reclamation, even regulation, right? Especially if you have ADHD. So we're going to be talking about the connection between stimming, self-pleasure, shaking off the shame, and how all of this can show up in our lives. So sit back, relax, maybe get that vibrator, buzz, 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 and let's jump in. So I think a great place to start when we're having this conversation is starting with why stimulation matters so much for people with ADHD. Now, I have to create the disclaimer here. The research just does not support everything that I'm going to be talking about today because there hasn't been an actual interest or an engagement in the intersection of ADHD and stimulation within masturbation. But what we do know and what we do have and hold research on is the concept and exploration of stimulation within an ADHDer. So we're going to use that and then the information I do have to better paint this picture for us. So ADHD, when we're talking about it, it's not just about attention. It's about dysregulation, the dysregulation of attention, of our energy, of our motivation, of our emotion, and yes, sensory input and output, right? Like, because our brains are wired for novelty and stimulation. And that's because the typical levels of dopamine that help regulate focus and motivation are just lower. And so when our brains are just like kind of kaput, the idea of stimulation becomes a very big like cornerstone, if you will. So it's like having a sound system that only turns on when the volume's above a certain threshold. And for a lot of us, masturbation actually meets that threshold in ways other coping strategies will not or can't. So you're engaging your entire nervous system, right? When you think about it, your breath, your touch, your arousal, fantasy, even movement, right? That goes involved into the action itself, right? That combination floods our brain with dopamine. It floods it with the oxytocin, the endorphins, basically all the good stuff that helps us regulate. It helps us soothe, helps us reset. And everyone is obviously different here. So when I'm talking about this, I'm not saying it as everyone with ADHD is going to experience this because listen, unfortunately, not everyone has a healthy relationship with masturbation. And whether we understand the reasons or not for that doesn't matter for this episode. Just understand this cannot be generalizable. I am going to be specifically talking to those of whom do find themselves in what we're kind of unpacking here today. And so for many of us ADHDers, especially us individuals who stim, right? Stim regularly even. It doesn't really matter regularly or not. Masturbation can actually function as a form of intentional stimming, right? Because like when you think about it, stimming, which becomes that short for self-stimulatory behavior, it's a way our bodies are creating control input to manage arousal levels, attention, emotions. So most people think of things like tapping, rocking, fidgeting, moving around like I do in my chair all the time as I'm doing my recordings. But stimming can be sexual too, especially when it's used as a way to release tension, to reconnect with the body, come down from emotional overwhelm, or simply create enough internal stimulation to focus again. So while that might sound strange or, quote, inappropriate in certain people's standards, in the way we've been socialized, it's actually incredibly adaptive. So let me say this plainly or transparently, if you will. If you're someone who uses masturbation to focus, to self-soothe, to fall asleep, or to feel grounded in your body, there's absolutely nothing wrong or broken about that. That is your nervous system doing what it needs to do. Now, the thing that we always need to be mindful of is your actions and your masturbatory behavior creating a distressful day-to-day functioning. That's something that you would have to determine and then work with your professional on that. But I want to shift to shame, because that generally is a huge piece for a lot of people when we're talking about masturbation. Because no conversation about masturbation would be complete without addressing the massive cultural, religious, and systematic shame that gets wrapped around it, right? Especially for women, for queer folk, and yes, neurodivergent people, right? Because like many ADHDers grow up feeling like we're too much. I can't tell you how many people I've met who have ADHD who feel the very same way. That this was the narrative they were told. They were too impulsive, too inappropriate, too touchy, too loud, too this, too sexual, too sensitive, too disinterested, yada, yada, yada. And then when those messages collide with purity culture, conservative values, or even trauma history, it creates a mess of internalized shame around our desire, our bodies, and what it means to need something from ourselves. And, not for nothing, shame is sneaky as shit. It doesn't just show up as embarrassment. It shows up as hesitation, as disconnection, even sometimes silence, as never quite giving yourself maybe permission to stay in your body long enough to figure out what you actually want. And I've worked with so many clients, especially women and AFAB folks, who tell me they avoid masturbation not because they don't want to, not because they don't want it, but because they were taught that it's selfish, or that it replaces intimacy, or that it makes them weird or even, quote, addicted. And when they do try to explore it, it's often rushed, it's goal-oriented, it's disconnected from pleasure, or it's just full of intrusive thoughts and distractions. And I wonder if that sounds familiar for you, because it is very common, unfortunately. And this is where ADHD adds just like another little layer to it that I want to bring in. Because one of the lesser discussed realities of ADHD is how it affects sustained attention on the body. Many of us have a hard time staying in sensations. The mind wanders, the body gets uncomfortable. You get a notification, you remember a deadline, you start thinking about laundry. My favorite is thinking about a text message that you forgot to send back 2-3 weeks ago. And boom, there goes your orgasm. It's out the fucking window. Or maybe it never came at all because the internalized shame was too loud for you. Because sensory discomfort kicked in. Because you couldn't get your body and your mind to be on the same page long enough to even feel pleasure, let alone enjoy it. That's not failure. That's neurodivergence. That's a different way the brain processes, a different way the brain experiences that situation. So what do you do with all of this, right? We reclaim it, we reframe it, and we re-educate ourselves and our clients. Yes, this can be for therapists too. If you're a clinician, we need to do all of that about what masturbation can be. So here I want to give, at this point, a few ways to start that process, okay? This is just a sprinkle of help as always, but let's start small, okay? So the first thing I think is really important here is permission over the performance piece, right? Your self-touch doesn't have to look like porn or even follow a stupid script. It doesn't have to end in orgasm. It doesn't have to be sexy, productive. You're allowed to just fucking want to be curious. You're allowed to be slow, explore sensory, right? Like that is, you're allowed to do that. ADHDers, when we talk about our experiences, we often do better with permission than pressure. Just think about our childhoods, right? So let this be a sandbox, not a test. Enjoy, fucking explore, people. The next thing that's really important is use your tools, right? Fidgets, music, scent, lube, with texture, vibrators. These aren't cheats. They're sensory supports depending on your preference and needs. You're allowed to build a pleasure toolkit that meets your body where it is at. If you stim to regulate elsewhere, okay, yeah, that's fine. Why not bring that into the bedroom too? I mean, we don't think about this very often, but everything ADHD that we talk about and think about outside of the bedroom definitely follows us inside, whether it be solo play or with a partner or multiple partners. The next thing that's really important for you to be mindful of is talk to that inner critic of yours, right? The shame. Because if that puppy comes up, name it. Literally. Like, oh, hey, there's that old voice that says I'm too much. You don't need to argue with it at all. You just need to name it and say it's not truth. It's your programming, how you were raised, the scripts, the narratives, everything that was fed down your damn throat about what was and what should be. And then you get to choose a new response. It's that simple. I know that I'm painting a very easy picture here, but sometimes it can be that simple. I'm not discrediting the hardships some of people might have in this kind of endeavor, but for a lot of people, this can be very straightforward and easy. The next thing I want you to do is reconnect to fantasy, right? Because when you think about it, our ADHD minds love novelty and imagination, and everyone is going to vary on what intrigues them, okay? But many of us shut this down in sexual spaces. And when you really think about it, it's like, why? Why are we shutting down that novelty, that imagination? Well, I'll tell you why. Because a lot of us are part of the system of holding on to that stupid narrative and script that we were fed about what things should look like in the bedroom, what things should look like about masturbation, etc. And so we fall in line, because that right there is a learned response, right? Falling in line with what we've been told our whole lives about what things should be or shouldn't look like. And so, yeah, the bedroom is no different. But I ask you to give yourself permission to explore mental stimulation without the guilt. Your fantasies are a space of autonomy, not judgment. Enjoy it, lean into it, get curious. And the next thing, because that kind of leads into this idea of re-stimulation and it being okay, right? You may find that once isn't enough. That's okay. I'm going to say it again. Once isn't being enough is okay. ADHD, in terms of our brains, we can crave redosing of stimulation. And I gotta be honest, you're not broken or compulsive for wanting to repeat what helped you feel better. You need to pay attention to whether it's meeting a need or masking one. That's the difference here, right? But don't pathologize the desire itself. And quite honestly, if it's not disrupting your day-to-day functioning, you then have to ask yourself, where is that inner voice coming from in terms of saying it's wrong? Is it a societal belief system? Or is it wrong because it's doing harm to you? And again, these are questions that you're going to want to explore with a qualified professional. And the last thing I think is really important to be mindful of around this whole topic of what we can do is advocate for yourself. Advocate for yourself, advocate for others. If you're a therapist, a coach, an educator, or someone who influences others, make the freaking room for conversations about pleasure. Don't feel shy, especially with neurodivergent clients. We need to hear that our ways of regulating, connecting, or exploring our bodies are not wrong. And we need to hear it from people who aren't just pathologizing us or skipping over embodiment completely. So this episode is quite short, by the way. And so as I close out on this important, meaningful conversation, I want to leave you with this. Your body isn't inappropriate. Your desire isn't excessive. And your need for stimulation isn't a flaw. You deserve access for pleasure, to pleasure, regulation, curiosity, on your own fucking terms. And if masturbation is part of that for you, let it be what it is. A form of agency, a source of self-knowledge, and maybe even so much as so a neurodivergent love language to yourself. I really hope that this resonated with whoever's listening. And I hope it reminded you that there's no wrong way. And if it resonated with you and you feel someone needs to hear this, please share it. It's important for everyone to feel seen, heard, validated in our experiences. And as always, if my stuff resonates with you, hit the follow button, share, like, whatever the kids are saying to get more views. Push my shit out there, please. We all deserve to be seen and heard. This is why I created this podcast. I couldn't find one that really I saw myself in. And ADHD is everywhere in terms of all of our experiences. It does not just shut off at work and friendships. It comes into all areas of the territory, and no one is talking about it in the way that I knew I needed to hear it. And the research sure as hell is still not there. So please, 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 push my shit out there. Share it. Talk about it. Advocate. And until next time, it's always, remember, always, 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 always about setting your environment, your relationship, and your sex up for success in a way that works with your brain and not against it.